Ford's fastest muscle cars, a thrilling ride through time. Hey there, gearheads. Welcome to the garage where horsepower is king and the smell of gasoline is perfume. Today, we're diving headfirst into the world of Ford's fastest muscle cars. We're talking about legendary machines that have left their mark on both the road and the racetrack. From the roaring engines of the 60s to the supercharged beasts of today. So buckle up, because we're about to take a thrilling ride through time.
You know, folks, sometimes the most interesting cars are the ones you don't see every day. They have a unique charm and a story that sets them apart from the rest. Take this beauty, the 1973 Ford Falcon XB GT. It's a car that stands out not just for its looks, but for its performance and heritage. Now, you might not think Australia when you hear muscle car, but trust me, this thing was a true blue Aussie bruiser. It had the power and the presence to match any American muscle car. But trust me, this thing was a true blue Aussie bruiser. It was built to dominate the roads and the racetracks. See, back in the late 60s and early 70s, muscle cars were everywhere, and they were the kings of the road. Every manufacturer wanted a piece of that action, and Ford wanted a piece of that action down under. They saw the potential and decided to make their mark in Australia. So they took their already tough Falcon and injected it with a healthy dose of V8 power. They made sure it had the muscle to back up its looks. Under the hood of this beast lies a 5.7-liter V8 engine, cranking out a respectable 300 horsepower. That's a lot of power for a car of its time. And a tire-shredding 380 lb-ft of torque. This car was built to perform, and it did just that. That was enough to get this Aussie icon up to a top speed of 132 miles per hour, which was quite impressive back in the day, putting it right up there with some of the fastest muscle cars of the era. It could hold its own against the best of them. Sadly, the Falcon was discontinued in the US in 1970, but that wasn't the end of its story. But it lived on in Australia, where it became a legend on the streets and the racetrack. It left a lasting legacy that is still remembered today.
Now let's talk about a car that's about as subtle as a brick through a plate glass window. The 1970 Ford Torino GT Cobra. This car is not just a vehicle. It's a statement, a bold declaration of power and style from an era that celebrated muscle and performance. This thing is a rolling testament to the saying bigger is better. With its massive frame and aggressive stance, it commands attention wherever it goes. I mean, just look at it. It's big, it's boxy, and it's got enough chrome to make a 57 Chevy blush. The designers didn't hold back on the details, making sure every inch of this car screamed muscle. But the real story is under the hood, where you'll find Ford's legendary 429 Super Cobra Jet V8 engine. This engine wasn't just about power, it was about delivering an unforgettable driving experience. This 7.0-liter monster was a force of nature, pumping out a staggering 375 horsepower and a stump-pulling 460 lb-ft of torque. It was designed to dominate the road and leave competitors in the dust. That was enough to rocket this beast from 0 to 60 mph in a blistering 6.6 seconds on its way to a top speed of 136 miles per hour. This kind of performance was unheard of for its time, making it a true legend. Now that was right up there with the heavy hitters of the day, like the Dodge Charger and the Plymouth Roadrunner. It could hold its own in any drag race, proving its mettle time and time again. But the Torino had a presence all its own, a kind of get out of my way or get run over attitude that made it an instant classic. It wasn't just about speed, it was about making a statement. And boy, did it ever.
The 90s weren't exactly the golden age of muscle cars. Emissions regulations and fuel economy concerns had taken their toll, but that didn't mean there weren't any bright spots. And one of those bright spots was the 1994 Ford Mustang GT SVT Cobra. See, Ford knew they couldn't just rest on the Mustang's laurels, so they handed it over to their special vehicle team, or SVT, to work their magic. And boy did they ever. The heart of this beast was a 5.0-liter V8 engine that, while not as powerful as its predecessors on paper, still packed a punch. With 240 horsepower and 285 lb-ft of torque, it could still hit a respectable top speed of 137 miles per hour. But what really set this car apart was its handling. The SVT team gave it a sport-tuned suspension, bigger brakes, and a limited slip differential, making it a blast to drive on a twisty road.
Chapter 4, 1987, Ford Mustang GT 5.0. Now the 1987 Ford Mustang GT 5.0, this was the car that reminded everyone that the Mustang was still a force to be reckoned with. See, in the early 80s, the Mustang had lost its way a bit. It was stuck with a 4-cylinder engine that was about as exciting as watching paint dry. But in 1987, Ford finally gave the people what they wanted, a proper V8. The 5.0-liter V8 in the 87 Mustang GT pumped out a healthy 225 horsepower and 300 lb-ft of torque. But it wasn't just about the power. The '87 Mustang was also lighter than its predecessors, thanks to its new Fox body platform. That meant it could really hustle. We're talking 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 6.3 seconds and a top speed of 143 miles per hour. It was a driver's car, pure and simple. Chapter 5, 1967 Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500 Super Snake. Now we're going back in time to 1967 to a car that's the stuff of legends, the Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500 Super Snake. This is a car that almost didn't happen. It was a dream that teetered on the edge of reality. You see, Carroll Shelby, the man behind the Shelby Mustangs, originally built this car as a one-off project for Goodyear to test out a new line of tires. It was a bold experiment, a daring venture into uncharted territory. They took a GT 500, dropped in a modified version of the 427 cubic inch V8 engine from the Ford GT40 race car, and let it rip. This wasn't just any engine, it was a beast designed for the racetrack. This monster produced an insane 520 horsepower and 500 lb-ff of torque, enough to propel the Super Snake to an astonishing top speed of 170 miles per hour. It was a powerhouse, a true marvel of engineering. That was unheard of back in the day, especially for a car based on a relatively affordable Mustang. It shattered expectations and set new standards. Sadly, the Super Snake was deemed too expensive to put into mass production, so only one was ever made. It was a rare gem, a fleeting glimpse of what could have been, but that one car cemented its place in history as one of the most legendary and sought-after Mustangs of all time. Its legacy lives on, inspiring car enthusiasts and collectors around the world.
Chapter 6 2016, Ford Mustang GT 350. Now let's fast forward to 2016 and a car that proved Ford could still build a world-class sports car, the Ford Mustang GT 350. This wasn't your average Mustang. This was a car designed to go toe-to-toe with the best that Europe had to offer, and it did so with a high-revving, naturally aspirated V8 engine. Under the hood of the GT 350 was a 5.2-liter V8 engine with a flat-plane crankshaft, a design more commonly found in exotic European sports cars. This unique engine produced a screaming 526 horsepower and 429 lb-ft of torque, giving the GT 350 a top speed of 174 miles per hour. But it wasn't just about straight-line speed. The GT 350 was also a handling champ, thanks to its sport-tuned suspension, magnetic ride control, and massive Brembo brakes. It was a car that could carve up corners with the best of them, all while sounding like a banshee on steroids.
Chapter 7. Now, let's rewind the clock back to the early 2000s, to a time when the Mustang was rediscovering its mojo. The 2003 Ford Mustang SVT Cobra, also known as the Terminator Cobra, was a force to be reckoned with. It was a no-nonsense muscle car that brought the fight to the competition. Under the hood of this beast was a supercharged 4.6-liter DOHC V8 engine that cranked out a tire-melting 390 horsepower, and that was just the factory rating. With a few simple modifications, owners were easily able to extract even more power from this engine. The Terminator Cobra was a beast on the street and the track. It could hit a top speed of 175 miles per hour with the speed limiter removed, and it could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in the low 4-second range. Now let's talk about a car that needs no introduction, the 2020 Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500. This is the most powerful production Mustang ever built, and it's a fitting tribute to the legacy of Carroll Shelby. Under the hood of this beast lies a supercharged 5.2-liter V8 engine that produces an earth-shattering 760 horsepower and 625 pound-feet of torque. That's enough to rocket this modern-day muscle car from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 3.3 seconds and on to a top speed of 180 miles per hour. But the GT 500 is more than just a straight-line missile. It's also a capable track car, thanks to its advanced aerodynamics, track-tuned suspension, and massive carbon ceramic brakes. This is a car that can do it all, and it does it all with a roar that will make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The 2010 Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500 was a game-changer. This was the car that showed the world that the Mustang could compete with the best sports cars in the world, and it did it with a supercharged roar that could be heard for miles. Under the hood of this beast was a 5.4-liter supercharged V8 engine that produced a tire-shredding 540 horsepower and 510 pound-feet of torque. That was enough to launch the GT 500 from 0 to 60 miles per hour in a blistering 4.2 seconds and onto a top speed of 190 miles per hour. But it wasn't just about raw power. The 2010 GT 500 also featured a revised suspension, upgraded brakes, and a more aerodynamic body. This was a car that could handle as well as it could accelerate, and it quickly became a favorite among enthusiasts and racers alike. And finally, we come to the king of the hill, the 2013 Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500 Super Snake. This car was the ultimate expression of Mustang performance, a fitting tribute to Carroll Shelby's legacy. Under the hood of this monster was a 5.8-liter supercharged V8 engine that produced a mind-blowing 662 horsepower and 631 pound-feet of torque. That was enough to propel the Super Snake to a top speed of 202 miles per hour, making it one of the fastest Mustangs ever built. But it wasn't just about straight-line speed. The Super Snake also featured a host of upgrades to improve its handling and braking, including a sport-tuned suspension, upgraded brakes, and a more aerodynamic body. This was a car that could do it all, and it did it all with a style and swagger that was pure Mustang. You know, it's amazing to see how far the Ford Mustang has come over the years. From those early days of raw power and tire smoke to the high-tech marvels of today, the Mustang has always been a car that gets your heart racing. And these are just a few of the amazing muscle cars that Ford has produced over the years. Each one of these cars has its own unique personality, its own story to tell. But they all share one thing in common: they're all a blast to drive.